In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to properly submit your tax information on your Amazon Associate account. And I'm doing this from the perspective of a Nigerian or a non-US resident. Let's get to it. So here we are on my Amazon Associate account, and you can see it says I should submit my tax information. You can also go to accounts. If you're not seeing that prompt, you can click on account and go to account settings. Then you're going to see your tax information section. You can see I have the United States tax status incomplete, and also the Canada tax status is incomplete. So that's what we're going to provide in this video. So I'm going to start with the United States. So there are generally three ways that you can fill out the tax form on Amazon if you are a non-US person. And the first one is if you are a foreign person who does not have a US LLC. You're going to fill out a W-8 form, and of course with your international information like your international ITIN, if you're in Nigerian, your tax identity number in your home country. And then you can fill out the form as a non-US person who owns a single member US LLC. The process is very similar to if you don't have a US LLC. The only difference is you get an opportunity to provide your EIN, and then you can get some reduced rates when it comes to tax withholding. So there's a little bit of a benefit there. But the best way that most people will advise you to do any type of business on Amazon, if you're going to be on the business side and not just the shopping, so like FBA, or you're going to be an Amazon affiliate or anything, is to use a multi-member US LLC. So you can fill out the tax form as a foreigner who owns a multi-member LLC. And what that does, and the difference between that and the single member LLC, is the multi-member LLC allows you to fill out the form, the W-9 form, which is usually reserved for proper US citizens who have an SSN. So the multi-member LLC is the closest you will get to being treated like a US citizen without actually being a US citizen, because you fill out the W-9 form. The setup of your business is a lot more complex compared to the single member LLC, and it's regarded best for the purposes of doing business on Amazon. But whichever one you have, it's absolutely fine. But I just wanted to make sure that you know that the way you approach this is going to be different. So let's proceed with how you fill out the form depending on your unique situation. So if you own a multi-member LLC, you're going to select business, and then where it says, are you a US resident or entity? Here you're going to answer yes, even though you as an individual, you're not a US citizen, because you have a multi-member LLC. Remember I told you that you're treated more like a US citizen than somebody who has a single member LLC. So you can fill out the W-9 form. And to show you exactly what I mean, this is a tax interview guide by Amazon themselves. And here you can see where it says, for US tax purposes, are you a US person? This is how you know if you should answer whether or not you're a US person. So if you are an individual who is, of course, a US citizen or a US resident alien, then you're a US person. But number 2 says a partnership, corporation, company, or an association created or organized in the United States or under the laws of the United States can present themselves on Amazon's tax interview as a US person. Notice here it doesn't say anything about being a US citizen or anything like that. So it's if a partnership or any of this listed are organized in the United States. One of the questions some people have is they think that one member of the multi-member LLC has to be a US person for you to present yourself as a US person or fill out a W-9. But no, as long as it's a partnership, even if all the members of the LLC are non-US citizens, you can use your multi-member LLC and present as a US person in the Amazon tax interview. And I hope that makes sense. So as you can see under the federal tax classification, you can select if you have a limited liability company, it's going to ask you to choose the kind of limited liability company that you have. So you can see here that there is no provision for a single member LLC, because a single member LLC is not a partnership. So if you select limited liability company, you can then select partnership if you have a multi-member LLC. And you then go on to provide your DBA if you have that, and then your multi-member LLC EIN. So I've gone on to provide my single member LLC EIN here, but of course we're not going to submit this form because I don't have a multi-member LLC. But just to give you an example, I've provided that and also my address of my LLC, my US address of my LLC in the address box. Click on save and preview. So you can see that what you actually get after filling out this form as your multi-member with your multi-member LLC information is a W-9 form, and this again is a form that's reserved for US citizens. So this is one way to fill out the form. This is the only time when a non-US citizen should be filling out a W-9 form if you have multi-member LLC. So let's try going through the interview as a business for my single member LLC. It's not going to work. We're supposed to use individual, but let me show you why it won't work. I'm going to select business there. The next question is, are you a US resident? Of course, the answer is no. And then you're going to be asked to select the type of beneficial owner that you are. And it's going to be a disregarded entity because I do have a single owner US LLC. Then move on to the next section, which is, are you acting as an intermediary, agent, or other persons receiving payment? The answer is no. And then for hybrid, if we say no, we cannot continue with the process. They would expect us to provide the information as a regarded owner. But then if we select yes, the form opens up for us to go ahead and provide our tax information as someone who has a disregarded entity or is a disregarded entity of another country. So now we can go ahead to provide information such as our name, the name of our organization, if we have a disregarded entity name, the country of organization. If you select the United States as your country of organization because you have a US LLC, you're going to get an error that says if you are a US person, you must complete the IRS form W-9. If you're not a US person, choose a different country. And under no circumstance should you fill out any form if you're not a US person or you are not a US person who owns a US LLC. You should never be filling a W-9 form. It's one of the common mistakes that people who have US LLCs make. They think that by owning a US LLC, it makes them equivalent to a US person. It doesn't give you US citizenship. You should not be filling a W-9. There's a form for people who are non-residents, and that's a W-8 category of forms, either the W-8 Ben or Ben E or ECI. You have your own category of form. So I'm going to change that United States and select Nigeria. And then I will go ahead to provide my Nigerian address, the permanent address as country Nigeria, the address, my Nigerian address, and all the other information. To save time, I'm just going to use the same information as my permanent address to be my mailing address, but you can uncheck that and provide a different address if you have a different mailing address. Now, this is where things get interesting. So for the taxpayer identification number, your TIN, you have the option to provide a non-US TIN. So for me as a Nigerian, I can provide my Nigerian TIN and also my US EIN because I have that as a person who has a US LLC. But if I provide those two numbers, I now get the option to select where my services are performed. If my services are performed outside of the US or entirely in the US or partially in the US. But if I provide this information, as you can see, and I select Nigeria as the country, it says the selected country does not qualify for treaty benefits. And if you select Canada, for instance, there are some countries that qualify for treaty benefits with the US, but you don't want to use a country that you're not from. Don't do that, else you perjure yourself. So I'm going to return this thing back to Nigeria. Once I select Nigeria, I cannot confirm and go further and submit this tax form. I select different options of like my services are performed inside the US, which is not something you should be doing because if this goes through, you're going to have to pay US taxes. So as you can see, that does not work. So I'm going to go back in and select individual under the tax classification. And then the next question is, are you a United States citizen? And of course, the answer is no. Are you acting as an intermediary agent? And the answer is no. Now, like in the business, we had a question of whether you're a hybrid entity, but now that question is taken off. You just go ahead to fill your tax information for the country where you are from. And then you go ahead to select your country and then your permanent address and all the other information, your mailing address, just like before in the business section. And you also still get the option to provide your non-US tax identity number and also your US tax identity number. So if you're Nigerian, if you select that, and it's going to ask you for Lagos or Ogun State Internal Revenue Service numbers. If you're not in Lagos, you can just select I don't have any of these, and then provide your business tax identity number or your individual tax identity number. I'm just going to provide my personal tax identity number there, the ITIN. And then also, if you have a US LLC, you can provide a US EIN. As you can see there, it says by providing a valid US TIN, you may be eligible for reduced withholding tax rate. So you still get the benefits of using a owning a US LLC and using an EIN, even though you are registering or filling out your tax information as a Nigerian individual, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead to provide my EIN, select the EIN, do not provide it on that SSN, because that's exclusive to that's a social security number exclusive to US citizens and US residents. So I'm going to provide my EIN. We'll go through the information one more time. Everything looks good. Make sure that you're saying you're not a US citizen. That's very important. So now I'm going to click to continue, and now we can tell Amazon where we are performing our services from. And of course, you want to say all services will be performed outside the US. You don't want to say it's going to be performed inside or partially inside the US. Make sure it's outside the US, because if you do the other two, you're liable to pay US taxes. And now once we click to continue, you can see that we get a rundown of the form that we're filling, and it clearly states that we are filling a W8BEN form, which is the form that you should be filling if you're not a US individual. Cool. So you can go through and see that all the informations are correct, your address and your country and everything that you've provided. If you've confirmed that all the information you provided is correct, you check to certify that everything you've done is correct, and then put in your name as your signature. Your full name is your signature, and then your date is there already auto-generated. And then we can now submit this form. And once we click on submit, we are going to get the form, and you can download the form and keep a copy for yourself and exit the interview. And once you do this, you have completed the United States form properly. And now we're going to do the Canada form. You click on that. Again, we're going to use the same process. We're going to select individual, enter our name, our permanent address, and then the question, do you have a permanent establishment in Canada? We're going to say no. What type of services are you providing? The best one that fits, I would say, for myself is educational services, because we're educating and then driving traffic to Amazon. So I'm going to select educational services there. And then, do you have a social insurance number? Of course, we don't have a Canadian social insurance number. And then, are you a registered GST or HST in Canada? You don't have anything in Canada, so just answer no to all the questions. Because if you say yes to the GST, for instance, you're going to have to provide the GST /HST number, which you don't have. So say no, and then we are done with this form. It's much more simpler than the US form. So now we proceed to sign with our full name, just as we did with the US form. The date is already there. And then once done, we click on submit. And now both forms have been completed correctly. So if we go back to our account, you can see that the message we have on this new account is saying we should submit our payment information, because the tax information part is done. So if you want to learn how to properly put in your information, your payment information, especially if you're Nigerian, then you want to watch the next episode in this 5-part series.